I'm no stranger to competitive games. I love fighting games like Guilty Gear Strive, Smash Melee, and Two Strikes. I'm a shameless gold rank Bucky main in Marvel Rivals, and I've even dabbled in League of Legends, quite possibly the most competitive game there is. If, like me, you've spent any amount of time playing a competitive game, you've either heard somebody be absurdly toxic, or you've been the toxic one yourself. I'm certainly guilty of raging from time to time, but I've never really taken the time to pinpoint what it is about these games that makes us so angry, at least not in a deeper psychological sense. Thus, today I want to go over the psychological concepts that explain just what it is that tilts us so hard when we lose. Let's start at the core of the issue, the nature of competition. If you boil it down, every competitive game is, at its most basic, a zero-sum system, meaning that for someone to win, someone else has to lose. This is a stark contrast to more cooperative games in which everyone wins or everyone loses. People can still get upset in those games, of course, but the key difference is that someone will always be upset in competitive games. There is always at least one loser. Social psychologist Morton Deutsch studied this phenomenon in the 1940s, claiming that competitive contexts naturally increase tension and interpersonal hostility. What this means is that when we are put in a multi-person system where one person's loss is another's gain, we naturally start to see other people as threats. This is a subtle and somewhat intuitive shift in perspective, but stop for a moment and really think about the last time you played a competitive game. If a teammate was doing poorly, did you think, oh, they're just learning how to play? Or were you convinced that they were ruining your chances of victory, either intentionally or unintentionally? More than likely, it was the latter, and this perception can spiral into blame and anger toward not just your opponent, but also the teammates you're meant to be working with. Another key psychological component of this is something called ego involvement. This is exactly what it sounds like. When we play to win, we invest some measure of our ego, our self-worth, in our performance. Ego involvement is part of a larger psychological theory known as achievement goal theory. According to achievement goal theory, there are two ways people tend to approach goals: task-oriented goals, which focus on learning and improvement, and ego-oriented goals, which focus on demonstrating superiority and avoiding failure. Competitive games tend away from task-oriented goals and towards ego-oriented goals. A player's rank, their KD ratio, even the skins they wear become markers of their status as a true gamer. Their self-worth becomes intrinsically tied to their victories. The games are no longer about having fun, but about proving something, showing that you are better than those around you. The natural consequence of this is that a player's self-worth must also be tied to their losses. A loss becomes more than just a loss, it becomes a sign of personal failure. It becomes what is known as an ego threat, an attack on our self-image. If you lose a close match after a win streak, your brain processes that pain in the same area as other social pains like rejection and embarrassment. The typical response to this is to try and restore your ego, and the easiest way to do so is to put others down. Hence, aggression is a common response. This aggression can either be directed externally at teammates and opponents, or internally at one's own lackluster performance. In summary, competitive games can feel like a constant test of who we are as people. This is the first major reason for the prevalence of toxicity in competitive games. They're a psychological battlefield where egos clash and frustrations build. The toxicity of competitive games is further amplified by something called the online disinhibition effect. The online disinhibition effect essentially states that social norms like politeness and empathy break down entirely in digital spaces. There's no obligation to be nice to people from the safety of a computer. There are several reasons for the prevalence of this effect. First, online spaces provide a sense of anonymity. You are in most cases no more than a username in competitive games, which comes with an implicit safety from real-world consequences. There's very little chance that anything you say in a match will be brought to bear in the real world, and thus people feel safe saying things they would never say in the real world. This relates to another reason for the strength of the online disinhibition effect: invisibility. The people you take your anger out on are functionally not real people. You see them as avatars, which makes them seem less human. They have no facial expressions to evoke emotion, they have no body language to read, they are, at most, a disembodied voice, and in many cases, the people you talk trash to communicate exclusively through text chat. This, in turn, results in another key component of the online disinhibition effect: delayed consequences. If you trash talk somebody at the end of a Rivals game, for example, and then you immediately queue into another match, you will likely never engage with that person again. Even if you do, it'll be well after the fact, and any consequences will be far separated from the actions that earned them. This creates emotional distance, which lowers empathy and makes it far easier to say things without really thinking them through. The final aspect of the online disinhibition effect is minimized authority. There are no moderators in games like League of Legends or Marvel Rivals. While there are basic censors in place, those are far from effective at stopping hate speech and toxicity. People are generally free to say whatever they want and experience no real consequences for doing so. All of these factors combine to create what is known as toxic disinhibition. In real life, it can be difficult to confront people. Behind a screen, though, that barrier is gone. There's no perceived cost to being toxic. It's all just a bit less personal, a bit less real. It acts as a psychological release, a way to express frustration and regain a sense of control. But it also fuels the cycle of toxicity and makes it easier for everybody else to justify their own behavior. This cycle can very easily lead to another psychological phenomenon called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness originated from a series of, frankly, cruel experiments in which dogs were shocked repeatedly with no means to stop the shock or escape the box they were trapped in. Even when the dogs were eventually provided with a means to stop the shocks, they gave up and resigned themselves to further shock. In a more general sense, this refers to a state of mind in which people become convinced they cannot escape their negative conditions, and so they stop trying to do so even if escape is readily available. In competitive games, this manifests as general resignation combined with external blame. In League of Legends, for example, you may hear the term loser's queue, which refers to a hypothetical system in which people are intentionally paired with teammates who are worse than they are, so that they will lose more frequently. This is, of course, not a real thing, but it is a compelling excuse and one that places the blame off of the player, which makes it a belief that some players hold dearly. This learned helplessness encourages a sort of passive toxicity that can be incredibly harmful to players on both sides of the match. So, what can we do about the issue of toxicity? The first step is to recognize the psychological traps we tend to fall into, and I hope this video has helped to illustrate some of those. It's important to reframe your mindset when playing competitively. You're there to improve, not necessarily just to win. Losses can be frustrating, but they are necessary stepping stones to improvement. They do not define you as a person, and they do not make you any less valuable. It is also important to highlight individual achievements even when you lose. Find a particular round or a play that you're proud of and work towards that style of gameplay. On the other side of things, moderation of toxicity obviously needs severe improvement, and more importantly, needs to be visible. Let people clearly see the consequences for toxic behavior, and hopefully they'll be more hesitant to engage in such behavior in the future. Ultimately, this needs to be a community effort, not just a personal or developmental one, because multiplayer games are, at their core, about community. We need to ensure that our games are challenging, yes, but in a fun way. The better we understand ourselves, the more we can create these spaces where everyone can enjoy the thrill of competition without the hate that is all too prevalent.